single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. New York's top leaders have still yet to reach an agreement on the state's fiscal plan. The latest development on negotiations this week is Governor Kathy Hochul has proposed a new tax on certain types of homes in New York City. These are houses that are worth more than $5 million and serve as a secondary residence for out-of-town owners. While at a press conference, Hochul said that these taxes are meant to help the city's multi-billion-dollar fiscal deficit. The move is widely viewed as a win for progressive Democrats who have been calling on the governor to raise taxes on wealthy New Yorkers for some time. Another big issue that leaders have been discussing throughout budget negotiations is the state's climate goals. In 2019, the state passed the Community Leadership in Climate Protection Act, meant to decrease the state's gas emissions. In this next segment, David Lombardo of WCNY's The Capitol Press Room and Politico's Marie French will dive into the context of that law and the potential changes this year. Here's that conversation.
Well, Marie, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it. And I want to get into energy prices right now. And for some policymakers in New York, the boogeyman here, the cost driver that they point to is the state's 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which set into laws a bunch of green energy and green emission goals. And you can debate whether that actually is the cost driver or not. We can maybe get into that later. But right now, I want to talk first about what state regulators, and specifically the Public Service Commission, is doing, which might actually impact that law. Can you walk us through what's at stake there and what their powers are?
Yeah, so in the climate law, there were built in some off-ramps, in particular on the electric side. So the state's climate law, as you know, has the goal of 70% renewables by 2030. Unlikely that the state is going to be able to meet that. And a zero emissions grid by 2040. Zero emissions has not yet really been defined.
Sure.
What technologies qualify under that haven't been defined, whether it could be renewable natural gas, hydrogen. There's lots of debate about what that qualifies as.
Could nuclear be part of the conversation?
Nuclear definitely qualifies as zero emissions in the state's view,
Sure.
I would say. Whether that would be online by 2040 is anyone's guess at this point. So what the PSC did was they issued not even like an official, we're going to do this, a request for comment on whether they should open a process to look at those electric sector goals.
Sure.
Because in the climate law, they can consider them on the basis of various factors, including, whether it's going to impact reliability and that kind of thing. So they've issued a request for comment.
Right. Well, how do you read into something like this? Because as you just pointed out, it's not their official way of doing things, and it is more informal. But do you view this as the beginning of a process that has a inevitable ending here? Or is there ambiguity about how this might play out?
There's lots of ambiguity, I think, but the reason that this is really significant is because the commission doesn't have to do anything when people petition them in this particular way that they were petitioned in this case. So this was from business groups who are skeptical of the climate law, from members of the Climate Action Council who have been skeptical of the climate law as well. And so they are asking for clarity because they basically don't think the grid is going to remain reliable if they aren't, able to repower natural gas plants, which right now, developers, investors would look at New York State, look at that 2040 zero emissions timeline and say, right, how can I recover my costs if I repower a gas turbine at this point?
Well, at the same time, you've got Governor Kathy Hochul, who began sort of subtly and now not so subtly indicating that she wants to change the underlying law itself and is looking to do that as part of the budget process. Do you have a sense of what sort of statutory changes she's looking to make as part of this push to potentially reduce costs in the long run and address that issue of reliability in the long run? Is it clear where she's heading?
Yeah, so this is important, right? The Public Service Commission only has some authority over the electric side of things. The governor has publicly said now that she wants changes in the budget to extend some of the timelines in the goal or in the law, and also address the issue of how New York counts emissions, which she has previously also pushed for in 2023. So that's where her focus is. You know, she's citing this lawsuit that said said the state had failed to follow the law, that said they should issue regulations by a certain time to achieve the goals. So she's pointing to that as some matter of urgency. Environmental lawyers dispute that.
Well, let's get back to that idea then of what's driving costs, because clearly the governor has staked out a position alongside Republican lawmakers, energy providers that utilize fossil fuels, that these mandates, the green emission goals, the green energy goals, are potentially going to drive up costs in the near future, if not already having an impact. Environmentalists, though, these advocates for this green transition who want to embrace renewable energy, say this is misleading. Can you walk us through a little bit of their argument?
Yeah, so on the environmental side, they point to a couple things, right? There's the issue that the CLCPA has not really been implemented.
Sure.
I mean, there are costs on your bill that the state utility regulator has said are linked to the climate law. You know, it's about, depending on what utility area you're in, it's about 10%, or could be up to 10%. That's things like energy efficiency programs. It's things like heat pump incentives. But the biggest portion of it is the subsidies for the state's, or one of the biggest portions of it is the subsidies for the state's nuclear fleet that already exists.
Which predates the CLCPA.
That program does predate the passage of the climate law. That's correct.
And what about the argument that the future implementation of the climate law is going to raise costs because the governor's office put out a memorandum that suggests that people's bills are going to go up thousands of dollars in terms of their overall energy costs? You know, how are the environmentalists sort of disputing those numbers?
Yeah, well, first, in the short term, they're pointing out the fact that right now, a lot of the price increases you're seeing are because of natural gas costs and the volatility there in the market, and we could be seeing even more of that, you know, with the war in Iran. So that's what they're pointing to in the short term. In the long term, yeah, the governor is saying, you know, if I'm forced to implement this program that I supported in 2023 and have said is the way I want to implement the climate law, then it would cost New Yorkers a lot of money. So she doesn't want to be forced to do it. She wants to change the law, extend the timelines, and change the accounting method so that basically, you have to reduce emissions less on the whole.
But there's been a concern that the scenarios that they've outlined with their cost estimates are not grounded in reality, that it takes the worst case types of expectations moving forward and doesn't account potential savings. Is that math, is that argument from environmentalists worth spending time on, or is that a flawed critique of the potential future costs?
So this memo that was released, was written and released by the Hochul administration, is focused on estimates based on 2024 modeling of what the price of carbon allowances would be. Mm-hmm. And then you apply that to sort of some of the numbers they had in the state energy plan for households and like how much they spend on energy and how much energy they use. So they are based on like no price caps for the allowances, no increased rebates. I mean, it does include a 30% rebate, which is in the law already. But, environmentalists argue you could increase that. If you're worried about that, increase the amount rebated to consumers. If you're worried about the prices being too high, set a cap. They say they're ready to negotiate over this issue and would be willing to come to the table and talk through it and not drop the lawsuit, but potentially settle the lawsuit, if the state actually were to implement this program.
Sure. Well, let's put aside the long-term problems and the debate over what's driving energy prices and talk about the issue of providing some short-term relief, because there have been a number of proposals that have been floated. Everybody who's running for office this year, which is the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor all have their own ideas. Is there anything out there, though, that is particularly meaningful? Because my read on some of these proposals is that they are around the margins, so to speak. It's one thing to say we're finding $250 million of relief. It's another thing to look at that in the context of how much we're actually spending on bills and to see that's only a small percentage. So is there anything that really moves the needle as far as you're seeing out there?
It's tough. I mean, it's a thorny issue. You know, the Public Service Commission has already approved rate increases that are going to come down the pike. They're going to have more cases in front of them soon to consider increases. They're sort of moving toward a more, I've kind of called it like almost an austerity sort of policy where, you know, the recent Con Ed rate case was much lower than some of the historical ones we'd seen in the couple preceding years. But, you know, people still aren't satisfied because that's still an increase. Sure. And it's a regressive cost for New Yorkers. The short-term relief options are kind of limited right now, you know, because a lot of this is supply, and that's something that the state has relatively little control over, and many of the solutions, like the governor's idea of building more nuclear plants, is long-term and also debatable in terms of the cost impact. So there's proposals, you know, in the Assembly. They have a proposal to rebate $2.6 billion to people as to alleviate energy cost concerns. That's kind of the Republicans kind of proposed a rebate as well before that.
With one of the big differences, I think, being where that money comes from, because the Assembly Democrats are basically saying, hey, let's raise state revenue to fund this type of credit, whereas the Republican response is, hey, there are existing pools of money that are out there. Sure, they might be committed, but no one actually has them in their pockets yet, so let's send it out somewhere else. A fair description? I
think so. I think they said that they thought some of their rebates could also be on budget versus from the utility collections that you're referring to for NYSERDA, but I mean, it's, you know, everybody's got proposals. Senator Kevin Parker, the Energy Committee chair in the Senate, called it a kind of a gimmick when he was asked about the rebates, and the Assembly also proposed a 2-year freeze on rates, including already approved rate increases, which would likely trigger some legal challenges or pushback from the utilities.
You say likely, I say most definitely, assuredly would probably get some challenges.
Who knows, Dave? We live in strange times.
Well, on that note, Marie, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
It's awesome to be here, as always.
In this next segment, we sit down with Assemblymember and former Minority Leader Will Barclay. After more than 2 decades in the legislature, Barclay has decided to step away from public service. We unpack his legacy as well as the complex political positioning of Republicans in the minority of the legislature. Here's that story. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect with us today, Assemblymember.
Thank you, Chantel. It's great to be here with you.
And after more than 2 decades serving in the state legislature, you've decided not to run for re-election, and you have stepped down from your position as Assembly Minority Leader. So what can you tell us about that decision?
Well, it was tough. You know, I came to Albany, I thought I would serve about 6 years. Next thing you know, I turn around and I've been here 23 years. By the time I leave, it'll be 24 years. So anytime you spend this much time in any institution, it's very hard to leave that institution. So I was a little bit more emotional than I thought, stepping down, particularly as leader, because I've made great friends. I think I've had an impact. The staff has been wonderful around me. So to leave them was really difficult. But everything has a season. I just felt this was my time. I'm 57. There's other things I'd like to do. And I've enjoyed every minute in politics. I've enjoyed government. But ultimately, this was the time for me to step aside.
And you were the first Central New Yorker in at least 115 years to serve as the leader of the Republican Conference. What did that milestone mean to you personally?
Well, it was a great honor. I mean, again, I've been with this conference for a long time. The fact that they put their trust in me to lead the conference when I was elected, it was an unfortunate circumstance with my predecessor who had to step down, who was a great friend and a great leader. And so that opportunity opened up, and the fact that the conference had, you know, the trust in me to let them lead them really was a great honor, and I loved every minute of it.
What advice did you share with your successor, Assemblymember Ed Raw, about how to approach leadership and sort of balancing the different views and perspective from members of the conference?
So that's interesting. Some of the leadership, prior leaders, the advice I got from them was saying always speak from the heart. You know, keep your ideological compass going forward, but don't be afraid to step out and take chances and risks. And that's similar advice I gave to my the current leader, Ed Ra, and he's going to do a great job. I'm fully confident in his abilities to lead this conference going forward.
So after 2 decades, what are you most proud of?
Well, let's talk from policy standpoint maybe first. You know, I'm in the minority, so it can be tricky to get things done. One of the greatest achievements I'm most proud of is being able to keep the Fitzpatrick nuclear plant active in Oswego County. That was going to be shut down. We were able to rally the community to show how much support there was to keep that plant open, and then we're able to get government policies and some subsidies to make it economic to keep the plant open. So that ended up saving thousands of jobs directly with the plant, but then all the indirect jobs that come with that, and also produce clean energy for New York State. So that was, I think, if I had to point to one thing from a policy standpoint that I was able to accomplish, especially for the district, that would definitely be up there. But Chantel, one of the hardest things I've noticed being down here is making your voice heard. It's very hard to do that as an individual legislator, particularly in the minority and some in the backbench. It's very hard to do. So one thing I fought for and what I try to do as leader is unify the conference behind certain policy issues and then work with that unified voice to try to make an impact on public policy. And I'm pleased that I think we had a lot of successes doing that. And also working with our colleagues in the Senate, the Republican Senate. In the past, we weren't really united always. And, you know, we have differences even now, but for the most part, we're united. And I think that makes our voice louder and as a result, makes us more effective.
When it comes to unifying the voices, are there any policies or initiatives that you may not have been able to see movement on that you're hoping to focus on as you finish out your term, or hoping that your colleagues will continue to build on that work in the years ahead?
Well, I think some of the environmental mandates, that's something we've been warning about, particularly with the CLCPA and how expensive these are going to be and how, frankly, a lot of them are just unrealistic. It's nice to now, we've been talking about this for years, but it's nice now hearing the governor talk about those mandates and wanting to push those out further. So those are the types of, we'll see what happens. Obviously, we got the budget coming up. There is pushback by the majority against the governor, but I feel optimistic that those are going to be moved off because I just don't think they're realistic to get. So it's those types of things that we've had a unified voice in the Republican conference, and I think finally is being taken notice of, and we're happy to ally with the governor on this to get those mandates pushed back.
And you mentioned one of the things that you're most proud of is having a relationship with the Senate Minority Conference, as well as the leader, Rob Ortt. What do you think contributed to that, and how has that sort of developed through the years?
Well, interesting. My colleague, Rob Ortt, who I think is a tremendous leader for them, but we're actually friends, so that helps. Anything in politics, when you can be friendly with either, you know, obviously it's easier as Republicans to be friends with Republicans, but I've found it being very effective even across the aisle. You know, for me, one of the things I've always tried to enact in politics is the fact I don't take anything personal. I understand that we may have policy differences, but I don't take that personally if you disagree with doing it. And so I've tried to build, you have to, obviously, to get anything done, and particularly in the minority, but I've tried to build friendships on both sides of the aisle and, you know, within interconference politics too, yeah.
And of course, you mentioned friendships. You have a very good relationship with Democratic Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie. It's not every day that we see two, you know, lawmakers from different sides of the aisle have such a close friendship and a real bond. So how has that relationship changed through the years, and what will you miss most about your friendship with Assembly Speaker as well as politically sparring with him?
So interesting with the speaker, we came in, he came in a little bit before me, but we came in relatively the close times. We were on the 5th floor of the LB together, so I knew him, not close, but I knew him before he became leader, obviously, or speaker, and before I became leader. So there was a base of friendship there, but I think really our friendship grew out of mutual respect that I had for him as a speaker, and hopefully he had for me as leader, so we could deal together. And then once you sort of build that trust, I think a friendship, you know, kind of a bond grew there. So I'll miss it. I think, you know, I appreciate, I don't agree with much from a policy standpoint, but I do appreciate his leadership style, and I appreciate all the courtesies he provided me when I was leader. So I'll definitely miss that, along with the institution itself.
And it was interesting for me to learn that you've actually ran unopposed in the last 7 out of 9 elections. So what do you think that fact means about your political power in both the conference as well as in your county?
Well, I think a lot of things tie into that. First of all, I have a very good district for a Republican to win in. So I think sometimes Democrats may look at that district and say, this is probably going to be a difficult race for me to undertake. But I also like to hope that it's, people understand the type of person I am and the type of leader and representative I've been. Again, I think I've had some success doing this. So I think, maybe when they're trying to decide someone wants to run, they may look at my district and who I was as a representative and think maybe it'd be better to try, to have a voice elsewhere.
And your father, H. Douglas Barclay, was a political leader here in New York. He served for some time in the state Senate and was a very well-known Republican leader for some time. So how did that fact impact the way that you approach leadership, but also legislating here at the Capitol?
Well, I owe it to my father, or could some days curse him, why I'm in politics today. He used to take me around with him when he was in the Senate, and I always enjoyed the political aspects of it. Interestingly, I enjoyed going to those chicken dinners or going to those rallies that he used to tag along. I'm the youngest of 5. Interestingly, none of my siblings were interested at all in politics. A lot of them had left by the time, he was sort of taking care of me with my mother. So I just naturally ended up going to all these events with him. So that probably really ingrained in me the love of running for office and trying to make an impact on your community. But some of the things I mentioned early in the interview, he did teach me, and one of the things was don't take things personally, build bridges, try to be friendly with people and be sincere about who you are, and that's what I've tried to do in politics, and it's been successful for me.
And when it comes to Republicans, of course, being in the minority here at the state capitol, that of course presents some challenges, but it doesn't mean that you can't be effective in getting different legislative priorities over the finish line. So how would you like to see the conference grow and expand in the work that they're doing in the years ahead? What advice would you have for them?
Well, if I have one disappointment of being leader, I would have liked to won more seats. Although we did increase our numbers over my time, I'd like to get out of the super minority and get over 51 members. I do think we can do that. I think there's a map to do it. Just got to be sometimes timing. Politics means a lot. But one thing I would encourage, and I said one of the proudest things is unifying the conference and being able to speak in one voice. I would encourage them to continue to do that and always look at the bigger picture. Don't get bogged down sometimes. Every member has issues that are very important to them as members, but just because that issue is important to you doesn't always mean it resonates or you can get that voice out to New Yorkers. And so I trust the new leader and the conference will find those big issues that we really can, one, have influence on, but also generate support in the public for it. Interestingly, as I said, we've been talking about these environmental mandates in the CLCPA, but there's a lot of things we've been talking about for years, and interestingly, affordability, for one, that's what everybody's talking about. We started talking about affordability probably 2 years ago, and so it's those types of issues that you can really move the needle on, and now you hear not only the governor talking about it, but you hear the majorities constantly talking about it, because it is a concern of New Yorkers. So I guess what I hope the conference would do forward is just be judicious on the issues that you want. You can't talk about every issue under the sun and expect to get sort of coverage on those issues. You have to pick and choose the right ones, and hopefully they resonate with New Yorkers and help. In my hope is to elect more Republicans.
So when it comes to the national sort of policies under President Donald Trump, how should the conference be dealing with sort of messaging around that, given the conference is in the minority, having to deal with, the Democratic majority in the state in a way so that it's not alienating itself?
Yeah, well, that's always a challenge. I mean, I think Trump is very popular in some parts of America, and unfortunately New York, a very blue state, its popularity isn't so strong. So I think we need to be honest. The stuff that we agree with the president, we ought to not try to hide from that. I think some of his economic policies will be very beneficial for New York and very beneficial for the country, so we could join with him. And other controversial issues, I think you pick and choose. For instance, my district, very supportive of Trump. There's probably some suburban districts or the city that are not so supportive, so those members are coming out of those areas. You know, again, I don't think you should hide from the president, or if you agree with the policies, you ought to say that, but you might not want to highlight some that aren't as popular as others.
And lastly, what's next for you? As you mentioned, you have worked at this for more than 2 decades. I'm sure that it will be very tough to sort of step away at the end of this legislative session or at the end of the year. So what's next for you? Do you see there being an opportunity for you to continue to serve your community, maybe not in a more official capacity? And what does that look like?
So great. I don't have, like some people leave office and they have another job lined up and they go right into the job. I'm already an attorney, so I'll go back to practicing law probably a little bit more than I currently am able to do because of politics. So I want to be involved in that. I certainly want to continue to serve my community. So whether that's, you know, volunteering for, you know, some boards or something like that, I certainly am going to be involved. And I don't want to get totally out of politics too. I plan on still being involved, just not probably in an elected capacity.
Awesome. Well, we wish you the absolute best. Thank you so much for taking the time to connect with us today, Assemblymember.
Thank you for having me.
And we were speaking with Assemblymember and former Minority Leader Will Barclay. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,